Welcome to Lakeland Public Library. My name is Brenda Patterson. I'm the fine arts librarian here. And today, in the library program, we're going to be interviewing author Peter Heller. And Mr. Heller, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's been fun already.
Yes, it has been. Yes, it has been. We spent a few days together and what have you. Yes. I thank you so much for agreeing to do this interview with me. And as you see, I have my handy-dandy little phone, which I will be, consulting every so often. Because I took to social media and I let everybody know, we have Peter Heller here. And I have a few people that I talk with fairly regularly on Twitter. And one of the ladies, who is a librarian herself, she said, oh my God, I wish I could be there. Of course, she could not. But she said she had a question for you. So I am going to include that question in just a few minutes.
Cool.
But you have done a lot of things. You've written 9 books, yes? 4 or 5?
Something like that, yeah.
Oh, 4 or 5 books of fiction, novels, 4 books of nonfiction.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know that you started out with nonfiction in that you were a journalist at, Outside Magazine, National Geographic, Men's Journal, and many others. Mm-hmm. But I heard that you really started out wanting to be a poet. Is that true? Ish?
Yeah. My dad read to me every night before I went to sleep when I was little. And he read a lot of poetry to me.
Nice.
And he was reading E.E. Cummings to me, when I was like 6. Their kind of body, that's like grounds for social services.
Yeah. Yes,
I didn't
definitely
understand him, thank goodness.
Yeah.
He was reading Yeats to me when I was 11. He read a lot of poetry to me, and I just loved it. I loved the sound of it. Mm-hmm. And that was my first ambition, I think, was to be a poet.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so the transition from poetry, but not poetry, into journalism. Did you even see that coming? I mean, did you think, I'm going to be a poet and I'm going to be a journalist?
I had a newspaper in my neighborhood when I was 11. Mm-hmm. So.
You did the newspaper yourself?
Yeah, it was like a little Xerox sheet, remember mimeograph?
God, yes. I am of that age, yes, I remember mimeograph.
But I remember I went and interviewed some big movie stars. They were filming in my neighborhood in New York, and I went and interviewed some big movie stars.
Did you really?
Oh, yeah. I had the pencil behind my ear, my little notebook.
Yeah. That's what you're supposed to do.
They had to let me in. But no, I was interested in all kinds of writing. And, I think when I was about 11, I got turned on to really great fiction. I wanted to write novels.
Right.
So.
Yeah. You sound like you just wanted to do writing, whatever form that it took.
Yeah. But I especially love poetry because I love the sound of language. I love even when I was pretty young, my favorite writers were the lyrical writers, the ones who wrote, they were sort of like prose poetry. And I felt kind of like that about Joseph Conrad and some of his passages. It was just very, very, the cadence.
Yes.
So I was just in love with the music of language. And I almost cared more about that than any story that I was going to tell. But I loved a good story too. My dad and his brothers and my cousins were all great storytellers. So sitting around the table, over dinner, we would all be laughing, everyone in the family, and one of these guys would be spinning a long story, and I learned a lot from that too.
Yeah, that's always helpful. It makes for a really good childhood to have storytellers in the family.
Totally.
And then certainly, if you yourself wants to be a writer, that's like the best foundation ever.
Yes.
I'm a writer, and my thing is poetry first and foremost. And I agree with you with the musicality of the language. I like authors like Ann Patchett because she has a lot of music. You can hear it. And every so often, writers like that, I will read their passages out loud because I just want to like actually hear it.
Right.
Yeah, it's just fantastic. There are a lot of really good writers in the world, but I think it takes something special to weave the music in it so that you have this story unfolding, but then it's like it comes with its own soundtrack.
Right, its own score.
Yes, because you can hear the music
Yeah.
in the language. So I had heard you say that once before about the musicality, and I thought, oh yes, he gets it. He gets it.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And you know, when I write, I'm very oral writer, A-U-R-A-L, because
Right.
I hear it as almost as a voice, and then I transcribe it. So I really write to be read out loud, and I'll read passage. My wife is my first reader, and I read big passages out loud to her, and I can hear where, you know, it stumbles or where it needs a little nudge, you know, to keep it flowing musically.
Right.
And then also she'll be nodding off at the end of the couch going, too much fishing. And then I cut that in half too. That's helpful.
Because she's like, oh, you have lost me. I get it. You know, because I'm a poet and I work with writing, and I'm like you in that my interests in writing go into nonfiction, into a little bit of memoir, a little bit of everywhere. And what I find as a poet is that because of the musicality and because you're used to writing tightly and putting a lot of punch in there, that oftentimes my pieces are short, whether it's poetry or whether it's an article or just any other piece of nonfiction. And I bring that up not to talk about me, but I noticed that your novels are very compact. The nonfiction is a little bit longer, but the novels are very compact. Do you think the idea that you've primarily started out as a poet, do you think that has something to do with it?
Yeah. I mean, I really believe in compression, you know, and distilling the language. So the Dog Stars, I started writing it, and it had no attributions for who. There were no he says, she says for the dialogue. And then
I read parts of that, and I didn't notice it. I mean,
right. Well, good.
I did, but I didn't. Then. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So you
flowed.
Didn't need it, and then there would be, you know, a short section, then an asterisk, and a quadruple space, and then another short section.
Right.
And I was writing in sort of tiles and making sort of a mosaic. And what I found was, you know, the poet in me, I think, appreciated the fact that in these short tiles of language that things were more compressed and more distilled. And I like that. So I think that came from writing poetry.
I thought that your poetry and your background in poetry had something to do with that, because having read your nonfiction, having read a portion of your fiction, I noticed the compression in both, but even more so, I noticed the compression in the fiction.
Yeah.
And so I'm glad that you sort of solved that mystery, because I kept looking at it going, I think this is the poet coming out.
Yeah.
Because I've noticed that other poets who write in other genres besides just poetry, their work is shorter, but you as a reader don't feel like you've been doesn't feel like
shortchanged.
Yes, right.
Right.
Because they have everything all nice and packed in there like a punch. Crystal Wilkinson, we had her a little bit ago here at Lakeland Public Library, and she's written fiction, but she and I talked, and she said that she started out primarily as a poet, and in looking at her fiction, there is musicality there and there is that compression. It's like it's being compressed into a little diamond. And so when I was looking at your stuff, I'm like, yes, it's got to be that. So I felt like I had to ask you that question.
Yeah. Cool.
There's another thing. I know that you've done lots of different types of jobs. You like to say you were the world's best pizza deliverer. And I like that, because one has to have, pride in their work, yes. But a lot of the jobs that you've had before you became a journalist, and then even after you became a journalist, had to do with being in the outside world. And I noticed that, or at least I think I noticed that, the outside world is very present in your nonfiction, yes, but also in your fiction. Are you doing that on purpose, or sort of are you so steeped in the outside world that it just kind of flows?
Well, I don't really do anything on purpose, because the way I write, because of coming up as a poet, I'm much more interested in the music and the language, as I said, than the story almost.
Right.
So I start with the first line, and I don't plot or anything like that. And so what happens then is that I sort of get transported. I'm enchanted by the language,
yes,
the sound of it, and I sort of find myself getting transported into this other place, this other world, and usually it's someplace I want to be. I mean, it's my party, right? I can go anywhere, and
that's true. It is your party,
and where I'm happiest is in nature. And so I often am transporting myself into some natural scene that I'm actually experiencing, with my senses as I'm writing. It's the strangest thing. I mean, it's almost like being, sort of like reincarnated into some other life, because I'm with another character in some place. And sometimes it's a place I've never been before. But often it is a place that I know. And then, often the landscape becomes the biggest character in my books, because I just love writing about wild places. And I think that's maybe particular to often in literature of the American West. I think maybe that's one of the things that makes a Western, both a movie and a book, is that the landscape is sort of like everything that happens is thrown up against this grand landscape, and the landscape is maybe the most important character in a way,
No, yes, that's exactly it. And that's one of the things that I prize about your writing, is that the landscape or the natural world is yet another character, and that it wouldn't be the way you put your stories together. It's like they wouldn't be as successful if they didn't have that character, which is the landscape,
for sure,
which is the natural world,
for sure. Yeah.
So yeah. I like it though. That's nice. That's nice.
Cool.
That's nice. At one point, I think I heard an interview with you that you talked about how you sort of talked your way into certain situations, like with the Sangpo expedition, that first and the first assignment that you got with Outside Magazine, right? And that's something that's sort of amazing to me. And I would like for you to sort of talk to me, obviously, but to the people who will be watching this, and tell them, how does that work? Because oftentimes people say, oh, I want to be a writer, but they never really know how to get started and what have you. But here with Outside Magazine, you had some expertise, and you just call them on the phone. So did you do that with other assignments?
Yeah.
And did you get them to teach you stuff? Because you said, I'm willing to do it. How does that work?
Well, it all started, I wrote a short story just in like a day, a very, very short story. And I sent it cold to Harper's Magazine. This was back when there was no email, and I just put it in an envelope and sent it to Harper's, which was one of the premier places to have fiction published. And I got a call on my, They didn't have I didn't have a cell phone back then.
So your house phone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like, we want to publish your little story. And I couldn't believe it. And so a little while after that, I called Outside Magazine. I got the 800 number, called them cold, and asked I looked up the name of an editor on the masthead that sounded nice. I opened the magazine and saw the editors. I was like, oh, Laura Honhold, she sounds nice. And I said, Laura Honhold, please. And they said, just a minute. I was like, oh, man. Laura here. And I started talking really fast. And I said, hey, I had a short story published in Harper's. It was sort of true. I mean, it was really short. It was in the reading section up front, but it was in there. And I just said, hey, I can kayak class 5, and I think you should send me on this expedition to the Tibetan Plateau. And, there was an incredulous pause, and then she said, I'm going to take a chance on you. And it was that expertise. I mean, she said, we don't have a writer that can kayak class 5.
Right.
And, she looked it up. I see that you have this story, and I'm going to take a chance on you. So, but it was that sort of like, I thought, to get somewhere, it's so hard to break into magazines, to any part of the writing world, that I'm just going to go for it. I'm going to think out of the box here, and I'm just going to call them. And I did that with National Geographic. I did it with Men's Journal. Yep, I would either call, or I'd just send by the time email was there, I'd just send a note and say, hey, I published this thing in Outside, and I can write like the wind, and I can kayak this, or I'm willing to go here. And I think everyone thought sort of like, okay, well, this guy's he's kind of brazen, and he's expendable.
Oh my God.
He's not in our stable yet, so if he wants to go do this crazy thing and he kills himself, well, so what? Maybe. I don't know if they thought that. But
that sounds bad. But it might have been an element, not that he's expendable per se, but that...
well, he's willing to go do this crazy thing, and he can clearly write. I mean, we saw this article on this short story, so it's sort of built on that. But I loved just sitting there thinking like, okay, where in the world would I love to go, and what would I like to do and learn? Whoa. And then I'd just pitch it. I mean, it was wild. I fell in love with flying in a little plane once up in Montana. It was going into a river trip, and I called up Men's Journal and said, hey, I want to write a story about learning to be a pilot in 3 weeks. And they said, okay, go. So I flew with these crazy bush pilots up. I'm one of the only people in the whole country that ever got a pilot's license in 20 days. It was like drinking from a fire hose. But, But, it's just this idea.
So you would suggest to writers to just go for it?
I think you just have to believe in yourself, and you have to ask. If you don't ask,
That's what my mom always told me. She says, ask, you never know. You could get a no, but you could also get a yes. I got tons of rejections. I mean, before that whole Harper's thing, I think I got rejected by Guns and Ammo. Oh, darn.
And Hunting Magazine. I got rejected by all these little trade magazines.
Right.
I got rejected by everyone. So, you gotta get tough, get the armor,
Yes.
Water off a duck's back, and just keep going.
Just keep throwing it out there.
Yeah.
They tell they tell writers often that, you should probably try to break in with the smaller places, or you should try to break in with the niche magazines.
But that's what I did. I did that first. I think my first published thing was with like the, American Rivers or something newsletter, and it was a little piece about a kayak trip, a little short thing.
Okay.
And I wrote for Canoe magazine and Paddler magazine, and I got this strong niche.
Okay.
And I think that is helpful for sure.
But had you written for those places before you got the Outside?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
We just want to put it into perspective.
Yeah. No.
Okay.
You do. And I remember being so proud of my first published article. I was 17, I think, and it was for the Brattleboro, Vermont Reformer, and it was a little profile of a kid who built his own little sloop. And, it was just like this big of an article with a little picture of the kid, and I was so proud of it. And that's how you start.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It is. One thing that keeps popping up into my head is that you have made this life as a writer. And you often say that when you went to school, they never told you that you couldn't make a living as a poet. So I want to understand, how is your life? What is your writing life like? Because we as librarians, we get a lot of questions from people who want to write, and they have this idea of what the writing life is like. Can you tell us a little bit more about your writing life?
Oh, yeah. Well, I think a writer has to write. That's the main thing. And, I read as much as I can. I'm a slow reader because I read for sound, so I read slowly. And somehow, I hate to admit it, but I'm listening to a lot of audiobooks now because I put them at 1.5 speed, and I can get through an audiobook faster than I can read it. And I like to hear, and I can still hear the music and the language and how it's constructed. So I think a writer has to read.
Yeah.
I think that's important. I think a lot of writers forget that. I mean, up and coming, aspiring writers, hey, you got to read everything,
Right.
Anything that interests you. And I write, when I'm on a book, I write 7 days a week. And I write 1,000 words a day. I never write less. And I always go just past 1,000 words until I'm in the middle of a scene that I love. So I never write through, get all excited and write 2,000 or 3,000 and then go, that was awesome. Because if you do that, you're always ending at a transition, double return, you're coming back to white space.
Right.
You've ended something. And then it's so hard to get the momentum, to roll up, get that rock rolling again up the hill. So I write 1,000 words a day. I write just past it till I'm in the middle of something. Then the next day I hop out of bed. I can't wait to get going because I'm in the middle. And those words add up really quickly. And and I really, I write every day. And I write in a coffee shop. During COVID, I wrote at home, but which was all right.
Right.
In a coffee shop, I put on headphones and I listen to Rain on a Tin Roof in North Carolina.
I do that. I listen to Rain because it fills in the background space in your imagination.
Yeah. Well, and it also covers up the real estate deal going on this table and the mom and her little kids, over here, and. So I can get in this sort of bubble, and then I can lose myself into the writing. So for me, it's a real discipline, and I sort of treat it like an Olympic athlete would treat their sport. So there's things that go into it. Like, so there's the writing every day, and that 1,000 words can take an hour and a half, or it can take 3.5 hours, depending on how fast it goes.
Right.
But I try and eat well. I try and get good sleep, and I try and get good exercise every day so that I can bring the best of myself to those few hours in the morning. And so and then the reading part of it, and so it's sort of a whole program. Okay. I take it really seriously.
You've told us your writing life, and you say how you approach things, but are you a full-time writer? You make your living full-time, basically, as a writer, yes?
I've been making my living entirely as a writer for now over 30 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Nice.
Because when I started writing for magazines, I would just go from one story to the next. Those magazines paid pretty well back then.
Right.
And, sometimes it was like man, I need a story this month to pay the rent. And so I would scramble around and I'd find a magazine that would take my story. So it was, a real hustle sometimes, for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's all I've been doing. And I haven't taught because the one time I taught, I went to grad school when I was 32. It took me that long, and I went to the Iowa Writers Workshop, and I applied to fiction school and the poetry, so they're two separate schools.
Yes.
But I loved writing both, so I applied. I thought I'd double my chance, very hard to get into, and I got into both. So I took both. Nice. I was one of the few people that has ever taken both at the same time. Oof. And that was as you said, it really helped the fiction, and then I wrote narrative poetry, and so I was merging the two, and it was really, really fun. But yeah, so.
But your journalism would have helped you to be able to switch gears quickly, I think, in doing the Iowa.
Yeah, well, the journalism thing was. The one time I was going to say the one time I taught was there. I had to teach a couple of semesters to get financial aid for my master's.
Right.
And I had such fun teaching. I taught like Introduction to American Literature to freshmen and sophomores, and I had so much fun teaching that I realized that, and I felt such a responsibility to these kids who had worked so hard and their families who were sacrificing so much to get them there, that I really poured myself into the teaching, and I realized that it would hurt the writing because you'd want to give your best to your students, and so I always stayed away from academia. And so I had to make a living, writing full time if I wanted to do that. So that's where that was. And then the journalism part, I think journalism was great training because it teaches you not to be too precious. I mean, the editors, they give you a deadline. They want it, on time. They want the facts to be right. You better double, triple check your facts.
Right.
And you have a real responsibility to, when you're writing, articles, nonfiction, you have a real responsibility to the people who are actually living their lives doing these amazing, committed things that you're writing about.
Right.
So you have to get it right, and they're short. Articles are short, so you have to grab the reader right away. You have to transport them to a place that's not the dentist's office where they're reading the magazine.
Yes.
You have to grab them. You have to create a sense of place. You have to have characters that jump off the page and are vivid and engage the reader, make them turn the page to the next page, go to the next paragraph, or it's too easy to just throw a magazine back on the table.
True.
So all that training was, really great for fiction.
Right.
And, it taught you just to be sort of tough about the writing, like, let's just get it done,
Right. And I love that you talked about writing and teaching young people, because here we are in the Lakeland Public Library, and we're in the teen room. And so teens need to know about the importance of working hard and making it something worthwhile. So
yeah, I mean, I think if you want to be a great basketball player, what do? You practice like 1 million free throws. You practice, tens of thousands of drives and passing drills and everything else. And you get to where all that stuff becomes, just instinctive. And then you can get into a flow, and then you don't think about it when you're, you watch a pro basketball player, and they're driving down the court, and they're passing and taking passes and making the shot.
Right.
I mean, they're not thinking about it anymore. They're
just,
and it's beautiful, and it's the same thing for writing, and it's hard. It's a lot of really, really hard work. But our lives, our stories are so important. I mean, our lives, there's a lot of great storytelling on television now. Netflix and Amazon Prime and all these places. Having these great shows. Well, those are all written by writers who devoted themselves and learned their craft and learned structure and learned how to make characters that were authentic and to make stories that were really compelling. And so. Anyway, it's tough work, but it is fun.
It's worthwhile.
Once you get into a flow with that, I mean, there's nothing more exciting to me.
Right, and of course that goes hand in hand, because I, as a librarian, have to say this: the writing and reading go hand in hand. It's like when you talked about playing basketball. Well, first they did drills. And then they watched other people who were really good at playing basketball go through their own drills. And then you watch those really fantastic people play games. And then you come back to your own drills, and then you play games and get better at playing basketball. And that's exactly what you do as a writer. Is you read other people, watch them, see how they put things together, then you write and put things together, and then eventually you'll get into the flow.
Yep.
That's
well
what
said.
we all aim for that. We all hope for that as writers.
I want to yell, hooray! Yeah, good.
Yes, we all aim for that as writers, to get into the flow.
Totally.
Yeah. we're almost out of time. There are some other questions that I wanted to ask, but we'll leave that to another time. Hopefully there'll be another time.
That'd be great.
However, on Twitter, I told everybody, you're coming. He's coming to our library. And one of the people who I talk a lot with back and forth, she too is a librarian. And she said, oh, I wish I could be there. And then I said, well, I'm sorry. And I said, do you have a question you want to ask? And she goes, and then like 2 seconds later, she typed really fast and she said, she loves the book Celine. She loves your Celine. And she said she wants to know if this book is made into a movie, and little did she know about the options of movies for all of your books. But she says, if this book is made into a movie, who do you see as Celine? Because she has her idea of who Celine should be. Who would you say you would like Celine to be?
Well, you know who, so Celine is about my mom.
Yes, I remember.
My mom died like 6 years ago, but about a year after she died, I sat down to write my next novel, and I started with the first line, and it was a young girl telling a story about her, her childhood, or a young woman telling the story about her childhood, and this young woman needed to contact a private eye, and that private eye was a lot like my mom, and then it was my mom, and I realized that what I really wanted to do was write a book about my mom.
Right.
And when you write with my method, starting with the first line and just writing into the story, you end up bumping into what you really care about. And in this case, it was, I missed my mom, and I really wanted to write a book about my mom. I could hang out with her more.
Right.
But so when I think about, the Celine has been optioned, and it's optioned by the guy who ran the Longmire series.
Right.
He called me up and he said, hey, I just spent 7 years doing a show that's sort of about my dad. Because Longmire reminds me of my dad. And now I want to do one about my mom. I was like, oh, Celine is my mom. So we had this long talk about moms. It was neat.
Nice.
And so when I think about an actress or an actor that could play Celine, I think of someone who looks a little bit like my mom, and that's Glenn Close.
Glenn Close.
She reminds me of my mom.
Okay.
And she grew up in that sort of milieu too, so she, yeah.
Well, my Twitter person said, well, my druthers is for Helen Mirren.
Well, Helen Mirren is an obvious choice. I mean, she'd be great, but the thing is if it's for a series that might go 7 years.
I know.
Or 6 years, and so they're looking for someone who's a little bit younger, like in their early 50s, so that they can carry it on.
Right.
Yeah. So anyway, but that's a great choice.
Yeah.
Bravo.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that we got that question in.
Yeah.
And I could question you all day, but we won't do that. I'll just say thank you so much for coming.
Yeah.
I've really had a lot of fun doing this interview, and I'm so glad that you came to Lakeland Public Library because I know that our patrons really enjoyed seeing you because you did the talk just earlier.
It's wonderful to be here, and I'm really glad we got to do it finally
yes.
after COVID.
Yes. And because I am definitely becoming a great fan of yours, I have to tell that story. And the story is, and I'm going to look at the camera to tell you, the story is that this is a wonderful person. We had him scheduled to come to Lakeland Public Library in 2020. I think it was April or May of 2020. And then, as we all know, COVID happened. And so we enter a legal agreement with authors, and we sign paperwork, and in the legal stuff is wording like if something happens not the author's responsibility, they can take the money and run. This man did not take the money and run. What he did was he said, well, let's just wait. We'll see how things go. And so he was supposed to appear in 2020, and then 2021 came, and he's like, we'll see how things go. And now in 2022, here he is. And he's been such a trooper. And if for no other reason than that, because he has been so gracious, you should read his writing. But if you read his writing, you'll be hooked, because you'll be hooked on the music. And with that, I thank you so much for listening to us. And once again, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Brenda. Really appreciate it.